What about now? Okay. What about now? What about now? Sound on. Alright. Let's go. I changed the setup here, and per usual, forgot to turn it on and didn't bother checking. Yeah, I was just saying, I'm just dealing with some toe issues due to the cold, so riding inside today just to move a bit. Haven't done much moving today in the morning. So that's that. All right, let's play a podcast.
Our guest today is Dr. Michael Platt.
That's not the one we wanted to play.
Would be a set every 10 minutes. It sounds really bizarre. Like, why? Would you rest for so long? This apparently has to do with initial memory consolidation. There's so much is still unknown. So we do know the grease to groove works great, but we speculate that some of it has to do with some of the same phenomena related to learning in other fields. So if you're doing something over and over, like you say, 2 plus 2 is 4, 2 plus 2 is 4, you're just using your short-term memory. You're not memorizing anything. But if you say 2 plus 2 is 4, you go get a coffee, you come back, and you try 2 plus 2, 4. So there's that desirable difficulty that you have to process that instead of just go through the groove. That apparently helps this adaptation. So rest for at least 10 minutes. Do sets of about the repetitions of half of what you're possibly able to do. And, listen to your body. Typically train 2-3 days in a row and then take a day off, but listen to your body. Incidentally, this Grease the Groove is the topic of my next book. I've completed it. It's not published yet. If you look at, I can't pronounce the Hungarian professor's last name, Csikszentmihalyi. Thank you, I appreciate that. So he's talking about that perfect challenge, perfect practice lies in that channel between boredom and anxiety. So if you put yourself in that channel, and if you keep lifting this moderately heavy weights with a moderate effort over and over and over, you're going to get strong. That's one of the many ways to get strong.
Are you doing anything in the rest periods between these 10 minutes? So is it, let's say, bench press, wait 10 minutes till you bench press again, but in the meantime you're doing exertion squat 5 minutes after the first bench press?
That's one of the ways to do that. You can do up to 3 exercises at the same time. So let's say you got like exertion squat and bench press and maybe a third thing, but I'd say those 2 are enough. And another option is you can do that. You can incorporate this into, if you would do only one exercise, you can squeeze it into your lifestyle or your athletic practice. So for example, let's say you're teaching a track practice or martial arts class, and every 10 minutes on the clock you just have the class drop and do 3 hard, let's say 3 one-arm push-up, okay, and then get back to the class. So there's no interference whatsoever. In fact, it's better than no interference. Back in the 60s, Soviets found out something called the strength after effect. So if you do strength work that's not exhausting in nature and that's not novel to you, it has a tonic effect just for anything that you can do with your brain or with your body, anything. So what they would even do, some coaches would do so-called strength warm-up. They would warm up as usual for a track class, let's say, track practice. Then they would do, let's say, 3 sets of 3 or something, like with 80% max, which is not much. And they start their practice. Then the coach noticed that the athletes are starting to droop a little. He'll repeat that, and he might repeat that up to 3 times. So what you have is, by having this short a very small dose, like a nano practice of strength, you rejuvenate yourself and your productivity increases so much. So whether you want to just do the strength exercise, several of them in that 1 hour period, or whether you want to combine that with writing a great American novel, that's your business.
I suppose if someone has access to the appropriate equipment at home, you could incorporate Grease the Groove into your entire day.
That's ideal, yes. And obviously it's difficult with some equipment, but what you could do, you could use the heavy-duty grippers. You could do one-arm push-ups. You could keep a kettlebell on your desk and press it at every opportunity. And again, the idea is really just practice. You're just trying to hit a perfect trap. And notice that if you have some issues, if you're a warm-up dependent person for orthopedic issues, I'm talking about warm-up very much in the body, not the mind, in this particular case, then it might not be appropriate for you. Although, with 10-minute rest, it might still be okay. But practicing a skill without the warm-up, that means rehearsal, is very powerful for improving that skill. People think they automatically equate performance with improvement, with learning, but it's not so, not at all. When you're doing something that's just out of the blue, it's, the way a sniper would take a cold shot. That's so much harder because you have to produce that solution. Or maybe an example that's closer to most viewers, golf. You go to the driving range, you start hitting it, and wow, you're amazing. You just get yourself fine-tuned, you're perfect. Then you go and you play the game, and you cannot replicate that. Because suddenly, different club, different topography, everything's different. And you didn't have the luxury of that tuning yourself up right there. So it doesn't feel like you're stronger, but you are going to get much stronger.
I've been eager to share with you some recent findings that are not my own, but that I think you might be curious about, and that I think most people hopefully will be curious about as well. It's not greasing the groove specifically, but it provides at least partial mechanistic understanding of how particular types of physical movement with this high motor neuron and attentional engagement can generate high levels of alertness that can be devoted to, as you say, writing a great American novel, perhaps. There's a guy at the University of Pittsburgh named Peter Strick, who for the first time started to map the connections between the adrenals and the brain. And he was able to do this using some really cool technology. The basic takeaway is the following. Adrenaline released from the adrenals, as some of the listeners may know, doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. It turns out it binds to receptors on the vagus, which then stimulates noradrenaline in the brain and provides this increase in alertness. So then the question is, how do you get your adrenals engaged? You can sit here and we can do a staring competition, which I'll lose for certain. But there are all sorts of psychological tools. We get caffeine, etc. There are all sorts of ways to get cold water. But it turns out what Peter found was that there are particular locations in the motor cortex that send basically a two synapse connection, disynaptic connection, directly to the adrenals. And the areas of motor cortex that engage the adrenals cause them to release adrenaline. But just by sheer movement of particular muscle groups, are the core, as we were talking about before, like bracing the core, causes the release of adrenaline, which then via the vagus causes the brainstem area to release noradrenaline, wake up the whole brain essentially, increase learning and performance in anything. And as well, the stronger and stronger activation of the motor neurons, deliberate activation of the motor neurons, seems to engage adrenaline release. Now, to me, this was a wonderful way of trying to persuade people that they have internal control over this thing that we call motivation. That movement itself can increase adrenaline, which can increase the tendency to want to move.
As long as, again, you don't want to have too much adrenaline either.
Right, and I'd like to talk about that. But I think I and so many other people were kind of raised and conditioned, at least in this country, to think, if I want to increase my level of motivation, I need to, watch an inspiring video. That could be great. Or I can drink caffeine, or an energy drink, and certainly that will do it. But to me, the discovery that particular movements and particular muscles being engaged in activity itself changes the neurochemical milieu. I mean, of course it had to be, right? It's a big duh. But I think that, anyway, I was excited to share with you these
thank you.
I didn't discover them.
That is news to me.
So I read The Naked Warrior. I was clothed when I read it, but it's a wonderful book because it talks about body weight only exercises and this concept of, for instance, like trying to crush one's fist on, making a really strong fist on the other side, and how that will increase your gripping ability on the other side, this kind of thing.
Yes, as you know, with your background in neuroscience, obviously, there's so many neurological phenomena, like if you can think of like muscle software, that we have access to, that if we become conscious about accessing that, we can be so much stronger.
Yeah, so when you talk about doing a set of 3 or 4 repetitions, or 2 to 3 repetitions at about 85% or 80% of 1 rep max, waiting 10 minutes, and in the intervening 10 minutes going and trying to learn something important, or physical or cognitive. This makes perfect sense to me because of the relationship of adrenaline, but also the way that your entire nervous system is changed in the intervening period.
And plus you have the contextual interference. So one of the greasy group is not something that I invented. It's something that I was able to codify and explain and possibly refine, but it's been around since the day of Ecclesiastes. And specifically in strength training, Paul Anderson, one of the greatest weightlifters of all time. He was a big favorite of the Soviet public. Very tough group to impress, but they called him the wonder of nature. He was so strong. And Paul Anderson would do a set of squats. They would wander around, drink some milk. Half an hour later, do a set of presses. Then go do this again. And so he he invented without knowing neurons from nylons many of the training concepts that are just cutting edge today. And again, so this concept of contextual interference, remember like earlier how if it's harder for you to produce a solution, if you're trying harder to remember 2 + 2 is 4, or how to throw the ball, then you're going to learn more, as opposed to if somebody just hands it out, 2 + 2 is 4. So Paul Anderson had both the spacing, time came by, so the group has been forgotten in the sense of time, and the contextual interference he did another exercise that erased whatever previous group right there. And it's very fascinating how looking at some of these old timers and just how genius some.
Yeah, the unconscious genius aspect of it is so cool. And of course, I don't want to be disparaging of common gym programs these days, but I do feel like the way that most people train. Yeah, you do that. Yeah, the way that most people train in terms of thinking, okay, I'm going to hit the gym 3-4 times a week, or I'm going to train chest one day, chest and biceps. But while that has some value, I feel like for creating all-around strength and hypertrophy, there's just such a incredible treasure trove of other things that you're sharing with us today that are just not discussed as much because people don't take the lens of the nervous system component. One thing that I'd love to ask about the nervous system in terms of training, adaptation, and recovery is that I was weaned somewhat under the thought patterns of Mike Menser. This was at the Dorian Yates era, and I knew Mike a little bit. I paid for a consult with him over the phone. We never met in person. So that had my mother asking, why is this grown man calling our home, and why are you wired? In the old days, you had to wire somebody money, so I did. But it was so worthwhile because Mike taught me that the goal of training was to induce an adaptation. Anything additional was not necessary, and in his case, he felt was counterproductive. Very infrequent training, etc. And it worked tremendously well to take me from like 150 pounds to 210 pounds, which I had no need to do, but my body just reacted like crazy.
Yeah.
Then again, I was 16, 17, and 18 years old in that time. Probably could have done any number of different things and experienced similar results. Who knows? But the concept, of course, is that you train to induce an adaptation, then you rest, and then you allow the adaptation to serve the moving higher poundages in good form, this sort of thing. The problem, however, is that, and Menser highlighted this, is that training of any kind, running, lifting, etc., taxes both the nervous system as a whole and the muscles locally in the connective tissue. Mm-hmm. How should we think about training and recovery? So when you describe Grease the Groove, I could imagine if I had a home setup or I'm going to the gym, I could maybe do 4 or 5 rounds of this training. But at some point, it becomes counterproductive. So,
wow, a lot of great questions.
I'm just trying to think about how to schedule this sort of thing, keeping in mind that the nervous system fatigues as a whole, and then there's also the issue of local muscle fatigue, or even the propensity for injury if you just overdo it.
Sure.
Yeah. So if we could just riff on this.
If you don't mind, Andrew, I'll break it up because there are a lot of great questions right there. So one, as you mentioned, there are different ways of training. And again, the Greasy Groove load parameters, apart from the long rests, are very much based on Soviet weightlifting system. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that later. Another system that's completely and radically different, and it ties very much to Mike Mentzer's training for reasons that become obvious, is the classic American powerlifting system from the 80s. And when people argue about training methods, what they need to understand is there are many ways to get the job done. You know, Atko Viro, his research in Estonia found because there's so many different combinations of stimuli and the different adaptations that result, you can arrive to similar outcomes in a lot of different ways. So to say this is right and this is wrong, you cannot sometimes do that. I mean, I can say most of the things are wrong, but I can also say there's multiple right ways of training, and they can be radically different. And they're different because they rely on very different phenomena. So in this particular case, you're talking about recovery and frequency, which is, again, a great way of addressing it. I'm going to talk about two systems that are completely different and yet have that same pedigree that they have brought so many gold medals. So one system is the Soviet weightlifting system, is again where athletes would train several times a day. And Bulgarian system is a more extreme example of that, and every day. And the other extreme would be the American powerlifting system, exemplified by Hugh Cassidy, Marty Gallagher, Ed Cohn, Kurt Kowalski, so starting from the 70s through the 90s. And those are really glorious days for US powerlifting. And in that system, they would pretty much do 1 or 2 heavy sets per lift once a week. So it's kind of a little bit like Mike Mentzer's work, kind of, but we'll address why. So how can that be, and how can both systems work? So you address the recovery. There's a concept called heterochronicity, which heter means different, chronicity refers to time. So the different systems in the body recover at different rates. And if you don't take that into account, then you're going to have some serious problems. So the Soviet system took, if you look at the Soviet system with frequent training, they looked at, okay, we want to do frequent practice, which is exactly what we do. We don't want to beat the muscles up so much that it takes a very long time to recover. You know, not too much eccentric stress, not too much acidosis, avoiding things like that. And they were able to adjust the loads in such a way, so let's say your weights are heavy but not too heavy. The reps don't go too high, so you're able to recover pretty much overnight. And the benefit of that is, it's been shown that if you fragment a given workload over more days, or more sessions, you get better results. And it's, your body is able, and your nervous system, endocrine system, your carcass, everything is able to handle much more if it's split into small doses. So let's use an example of a meal. Let's say if you were trying to eat an eating competition, how much you can eat in 24 hours. So it's not like those Coney Island, you know, how many hot dogs you can eat in one sitting, no. But you would probably eat a lot more if you spread it throughout the day. And this is the same idea. Just like that parable from Nassim Taleb about the king that got angry at his son. And he says he's going to crush him with a big rock. And you're like, well, what did I do? I don't want to kill this kid. But the king's word is king's word, right? So he ordered his peons to break up the rock into pebbles and just dump his pebbles in the kid. So that's the same idea. So fragmentation, the load always allows you to do more and do it safer. So something else is related to that. In some training systems rely on adaptations, let's say for strength, that go in the muscle, that go beyond just the contractile proteins, just the part, the part that create force. So, for example, the Soviet system, they also try to increase the storage of creatine phosphate, which is the kind of immediate fuel for muscle contractions for this type of work, for lifting heavy weights over and over. And so by training sometimes easier, you're able to keep stimulating that creatine phosphate adaptation, but without still allowing muscles to recover. So it's kind of a dance. And it's fairly complex. Then, on the other hand, the American system did something completely different. And the explanations for what happens in the muscle within this American system, we didn't know for sure, but there's a hypothesis by a Russian specialist, Vadim Patasenko, That seems quite credible. So again, the system, here's the system. You train hard, you want hard set once a week, or 2 hard sets. So the satellite cells that are immature cells in the muscle, they're sitting there waiting to jump in, if you need to replenish the messed up ones. In order for the satellite cells to get their job done, scientists try to figure out what sort of stimuli are required. And a strong case can be made that a very particular damage to the microstructure of the muscle can provoke that stimulus. But that damage has to be very, very specific. If you beat up the muscle with a baseball bat, you're just going to get a whole lot of scar tissue, and some satellite cells will just die, and others will just become scarred. But if the cross bridges in the muscle, the cross bridges is that part that does create force in the muscle, if they do tear in a very specific way, it seems to do the job. So the way the muscle contracts is, so there is, imagine that you're rowing a boat on the water. So water is one protein, it's called actin, and myosin is the oars that are moving in there. So the oar dips into the water, hooks, and pulls. And that oar relies on available energy in the muscle, so these ATP molecules of stored energy, they're floating around, and myosin head needs that ATP in order to bolster the hook to produce force, but it needs ATP to unhook as well. And it's in this in-between stage, it's called a rigor. So whenever the muscle has produced force, but there's not enough energy for it to relax, so the muscle is stuck in rigor. So think of rigor mortis. So if you tear that body's muscle, it's going to tear. And supposedly this is going to happen only when you're able to, when the consumption of ATP is really high in the muscle, but the supply is not. And so if you do that in the first, let's say 20, 30 seconds before acidosis set in, that's what should happen. Because if you wait longer, when there's a lot of acid in the muscle, it kills that reaction that uses ATP. So you're not using as much anymore. Sure, the demand is down, the supply is down, but so in demand, so it's not so good. So if you raise that fatigue point, so if you try to deplete that creatine phosphate, that kind of a rocket fuel of the muscle within about 20, 30 seconds, then presumably some of these hooks, some of these oars are going to get stuck. And when the muscle is lengthening, they're going to tear. And that's a very specific tear. It doesn't happen on the outside of the muscle, it happens just on the inside, in there. Whether this is true or not, I do not know. But it's a pretty good theory that does explain Mike Mentzer's method and explains the American powerlifting method. Interestingly about Mike Mentzer, and again to the listeners who are not aware of the method, that means train a muscle really hard, very frequently, with very low volume. Professor Yuri Verkhoshansky, before he died, a famous Soviet sports scientist, known in the West mostly as the father of what is called plyometrics in the West. But he's also done many other things as well. He spoke very highly about Mentzer. He thought Mentzer was brilliant, Mentzer was an innovator. But some people get good results from it like you did, and a lot of people do not. And so pretty much what Protasnica suggested that might happen is eventually you reach the limit of adaptation of how much you can deplete the creatine phosphate in that window. That's when you hit the wall. And this is where the American system comes in. This system is called cycling. The history of cycling is fascinating. The relationship, the interaction between the Soviet and American strength schools is absolutely fascinating. So just to go back for a minute, Soviet track athletes in the 50s were using typical stupid high rep reps to burn. Then in the late 50s, some very sharp young specialist, Vitaly Chizinov, he made a case at a conference with let's look what Paul Anderson, Di Hepburn, Bruce Randall, these North American strength guys, let's look what they're doing. They're lifting heavy stuff for sets of 3 to 5 reps. Let's knock this down some soft. Soviet track athletes started doing that right there. So this is how the Soviets, for example, learned from Americans. That's an example of how it went the other way. The classic periodization, as is known, Matveev's periodization, in which you kind of start out with higher volume and less specific to lower, to lower volume, more intensity, and so on. That periodization is not used by lifters in the Soviet Union. Lifters thought that's completely not, it's just not usable. It's just inappropriate for their needs. Arkady Vorobyov, the professor and Olympic champion, made a very strong case why. But Americans who got some limited information about it, American powerlifters, not weightlifters, were able to develop their own training system based on that premise, something that the Soviets didn't do. And the way it worked is like this. You don't necessarily have very high volume, but you start, I'm going to give you a most classic example of this type of cycling. Again, this is, Cassidy, Gallagher, Cole, Karwoski. 4-week blocks, let's say that there's like going to be 3-4 week blocks, maybe 4. So you do lift once a week. On week 4, you go for a PR. So let's say this is a month of 5s. So this is on your week 4, you're going to do a PR set of 5. You plan for it. Week 3 is somewhere around your old PR. Week 2 is lighter. Week 1 is lighter still. Okay? And then after that, you may increase the weight, but still relative effort is going to drop. You're going to kind of repeat the process. So it does multiple things. On the muscular level, so what Partasik explained, you pretty much decondition yourself temporarily, and you progressively increase that creatine phosphate use. So initially, when you're deconditioned, it doesn't take as much to get the stimulus. You don't have to push really hard the first week. You push harder in the second, and harder and harder. There's a concept, in periodization, so in sports science, of reactivity versus resistance. Reactivity means how responsive your body is to the stimulus, and resistance, kind of like in medical terms, how much it can, it's not effective. So when you're starting light, after layout, your reactivity is high, and your resistance is low. It doesn't take much. So boom, suddenly you build this muscle. And then you keep building up. And when you reach a peak, then you just step back again. And on the side of the nervous system, endocrine system, much later Soviet research, they said you can train hard maximum 2 weeks out of 4. That's it. More than that, you cannot handle.
So for every month you're training
2 weeks hard.
That's the other ones you're cruising. You're
not as hard. Sometimes easy, sometimes there are different ways of programming it. The typical one that you hear about in the West is you're going to build things up for 3 weeks and then down to 4. It's one of the about 16 different possible arrangements. Doesn't have to be. There can be, here's one brilliant way. Franco Colombo, who passed unfortunately, was not just a great bodybuilder. He was a great chiropractor, great strength athlete. Super strong, very strong, and brilliant. So he told me about his deadlift cycle. Week 1, moderate. Week 2, heavy. Week 3, moderate. Week 4, very heavy. Again, this is a different way of arranging the same concept. And these American powerlifters were able to build this system that built the muscle probably exactly in this manner. What was happening at the same time? Oh yeah, and there's also another angle, how that system possibly has worked. This is fascinating. Any type of exercise that you do makes your muscles more slow twitch. It's just the way it is. It's very, very bizarre. Yeah.
even explosive.
Even explosive.
You can just try to crush the bar and drive the deadlift.
Even that, the more you do it. So Goldspin's research back in the 80s that any cycle of stretching or contraction resets the heavy chain myosin, the contractile proteins that makes it towards slower time. So any type of work. If you do biopsy on somebody who's a couch potato, you're going to find that person probably has a higher concentration of white fibers than you and I.
Wow, very counterintuitive.
Very counterintuitive. And so that's like a default setting for the fibers. However, if you take time off, something changes, and it changes. It goes beyond the change. So this research came out of Sweden, I believe, when they trained a group of subjects in strength. They saw a predicted decrease in the ratio of type 2X fast twitch fibers. Then they took a couple months off, and then they experienced, they called it MHC overshoot, myosin heavy chain, again, like fast fiber overshoot. So they had something like 70% more fibers after that.
Wild. Nobody takes 2-3 months off these days.
But they figured out, Verkhoshansky figured out that is not needed for athletes, because obviously you get deconditioned in other ways, right? So remember, we talked about heterogeneity. Different processes take place at different rates. So it's like you're constantly playing the whack-a-mole. So this is getting out of shape, but this is not recovered yet. It's a game. That's a game of training program. So in the American system, first of all, the infrequent training, it reduced the stimulus for the conversion of the fibers towards a slower isoform, slower times. And the second of all, the taper that they did later. So someone switching from 5 to like 1 triple, 1 double for a few weeks. If you do that for just a few weeks, you do like a 1 triple, 1 double, you're not going to lose much muscle mass because it really takes over a month. But there's enough time for the myosin to reconfigure itself in faster time. So that's probably what happens.
Interesting.
And neurologically, I think what happens probably, they exerted themselves very strongly once, twice a month. So it's again, neural drive, probably strength and disinhibition and other things like that. And the irony is, the system has lost its popularity. Some records in the deadlift, like Dan Austin's record and possibly Nava's, set back in the 90s and 80s. There's Lamar Gant. Lamar Gant is the strongest deadlifter pound per pound in history. So like 683 and buck 32 or something like that. And it was done back in the 80s. So he trained that way. Dan Austin. In other lifts, records have increased in part because of the equipment changes and some other reasons. But Ed Cohen dominated the platform for decades. And so there are some great lifters who train this way, but then the system lost its popularity for reasons that have nothing to do with its effectiveness. It doesn't mean it's appropriate for everybody, because train a lift once a week for 1 or 2 sets, there's not much practice. And that's a problem. So unless you are training under a very high-level coach or you're already coming in with great skills, it's really good. Second, if you need any kind of level of endurance, or if you're playing other sport, you're going to be very sore from this type of training. So it's a great system for certain type of people.
I'd like to take a quick break and acknowledge one of our sponsors, Element. Element is an electrolyte drink that has everything you need, but nothing you don't. That means the
So this is Professor Victor Suliana. So according to him, the preconditions for muscle growth, in addition to the obvious like food and things and hormones. So when you reach a certain level of acidosis, only a certain level of acidosis, not necessarily very high, that those hydrogen ions will make the membrane permeable to the hormones, so they're going to enter and go to the nucleus and start doing their job. So that's one of the part of the explanation. Then at the same time, also the free creatine, when creatine phosphate, that hot food gets burnt off, that's also anabolic for one reason or another. So there are some explanations. Whether that's how it is or not, I don't know. But the fact is doing a hard 30, 40 second set, followed by a very generous rest, we're talking about 5-10 minutes, and repeating it 5 times, possibly more, it works very, very well.
I'd like to take a quick break and acknowledge our sponsor, Maui Nui Venison. Maui?
The hell?
They do another way. So your conditioning for fast twitch fibers can be structured in the same manner. So there's Russian researcher named Babikin. He put his several groups of athletes into the protocols. So one of them was doing the typical high intensity, whatever, circuit training, smoking, right? So you take 70% of your 1 rep max and you do this for 30 seconds and you go push hard and you do the next one. Very typical. Then the other group anti-glycolytic group, these athletes would lift the same 70% 1 rep max for 3 reps. They do one exercise, second exercise, third exercise, rest for 1 minute, do it again and again and again. So to the listeners, 70 rep max, an average athlete can probably crank out about 12 reps with it. And a fighter is probably going to crank out 20 some reps with that easily. So they only do 3 reps. And so 3 reps, another exercise, rest for 1 minute, do it over and over and over. And the end result was really fascinating, the outcome. There is one particular test discovered by the same researcher that has the highest correlation competitive performance for MMA fighters. So this test was R0.888. It's very, very high. And very interesting thing, what it is, it's the rate of heart rate recovery after an all-out set with 70% 1 rep max tempo. It's hard set, it's brutal, very, very brutal. Interestingly enough, the reps with 70% 1 rep max correlation was not so good. Even the deadlift strength was not so high. But it's that recovery from that was very, very high. So the group that did this anti-glycolytic work, never did more than 3 reps, completely blew the traditional training group out of the water. Then, in addition to that, they were able to bang out a lot more consecutive reps as well. They weren't even training for them. Then, after that, they also saw competitive, better results in competition, and so on and so forth. It's a great way to train because you're able to. So imagine taking a weight that you can lift maybe 12 to 20 times, and you lift it about 3 times. Rest for a minute and do it again and again and again. This is very much like a blue-collar worker's day, and you're not seeking pump whatsoever, but as a result, you're going to develop that type of endurance, that repeat strength endurance that very much is applicable to most combat and team sports, and also for the real life. Whenever you are moving furniture, you're not trying to, look, I'm going to try to get a pump. Let's see, get this piano up there and get another one. Then we're going to rest for 20 minutes. Then we're going to start over. No. Swedish work on occupational strength, they found that old and crafty and wily workers like loggers and others, they were able to, they keep their efforts very brief and then they rest for a few seconds and do it over and over and over. So that intermittent nature of rest is very powerful.
It seems like this is a repeating theme. And by the way, thank you for spelling that out. So for people that perhaps want to try something like this, and I intend to, 4 exercises, 3 exercises, done each at roughly 70% of your 1 repetition maximum. So what you could do for about 12 repetitions, but you're only doing 3 repetitions. Rest a minute in between exercises.
And the rest active again. Just walk around, shake it off. Okay. Yeah, and do this about 15 times, possibly later.
15
up
rounds.
To 15 rounds.
And so this could be Zercher squat, pull up, dip, deadlift or something. Maybe
I
deadlift
probably would not
squat.
do the deadlift.
Right.
You use really good examples. So this is a protocol that I did for a couple of friends of mine for their high-level BJJ competition. We did exactly that. They did Zerchers, they did pull-ups on towels, and more specific and more grip, and they did the closed grip bench press. And the reason it's closed, it doesn't put on quite as much mass, but it works at triceps really quite nicely. But you can even do it with 1 exercise. 3 reps, rest for a minute, 3 reps, rest for a minute, and so on.
How many times per week is one repeating?
You can repeat this 3-4 times a week easily, but it depends on what else you do.
And it's
twice a week is enough. Even twice a week is enough, and it fits your strength training regimen. It doesn't take away from your strength day. So pretty much you can treat that as your light day for your strength for the same lifts.
Okay, so and this is going to increase endurance, but is also going to increase strength somewhat.
It's going to increase strength somewhat, and Babikin's experiments it definitely did, at least on fighters, but realize fighters typically are not that strong. So up to a point, it is going to increase your strength as well. And at the very least, it's going to support your strength. And it's a great way to just perfect your technique, perfect your skill. It's wonderful. It's very, very meditative. My colleague at Strong First, Brad Jones, he even just wrote a book about it, art and cardio, because he took a protocol, strength aerobics protocol, like this Russian protocol developed by another one of my colleagues, Alexei Senat, another one of our instructors. And he just used the whole system, and people love it because, sorry, I'm going to go back from the beginning to Alexei Senat.
Alright everybody, if anyone's watching, that's it for today. Until tomorrow. Peace out.